this lab is going to have evidence in it. That evidence obviously has an adversary. That adversary is going to want to get rid of that evidence in some cases. So you actually need physical security for your lab. I would say to people who have, say, the CASP or the CISSP, that all the physical constraints that you would put in place for your information security for your server room would be at least the level of security that you would put in place for your forensics lab. And that kind of ends the conversation there. Well, no, we need to go ahead and be detailed about this because you might not be a CASP or a CISSP. So you've got to deal with the emergency services to get them there. Lighting at that particular light, physical environment of the lab needs to be nice and clean and neat, and parking is a big consideration. Remember, if you're parking in the main parking lot and you're carrying evidence out of your van and into the building, it could be that somebody actually accosts you there. You might have internal parking or the loading dock and have special procedures set up so that when the forensics truck comes to unload evidence, that they wait until there's an armed guard outside. I don't know what that is for you, but you need to make sure that you have the highest level of security when it comes to the end of the transportation line when you're putting it into your forensics lab or actually putting it in your evidence locker. So the base requirements are having all of these components, and we're going to look at each one of these components. Let's dig down into them. General physical checklist. Note the ceiling, the floor, the walls. Check all of those at least once a month. That means if you look up right now, well, if you were in here, you would see that we've got ceiling tiles. And if this was my forensics lab, once a month what I would do is I would lift up the ceiling tile and I would look around and see to make sure that there's nobody tunneling through or there's no gaps or any problems like that. I would look down at my floor and make sure that it's probably a tiled surface or a carpeted surface to make sure that it is safe. Look at the doors, look at the hinges, pay attention to all that, do that examination, and check to make sure that your locks are working properly even under stress. You may even, if you want to go to the level of extreme, if you've got a single door to your particular location, you may even want to have your locksmith come in and check that particular door and those particular locks on a semi-annual basis to kind of go a little bit overboard. You also want to look at the log register to make sure that anybody that can come in and out of the facility actually logs in, logs out, and puts all their relevant data down there. Those logs should be checked. Those log sheets for in and out of the door should also be logged. There should also be log sheets for the evidence locker or the evidence containers, and make sure that that's clearly identified as the evidence moves in and out of that evidence container. Because you're going to open the evidence container, you're going to go inside and you're going to make a duplication of this particular data right here, or you're going to examine the evidence and then you've got to seal it back up and put it away. Well, you have to record that. That's part of your chain of evidence that you're recording as you're moving through when you look at that evidence. It would be wonderful if you captured if you pulled in all your data off of all those particular parts, those hard drives, those thumb drives, those things, and kept that sealed and put that away until the trial date, and you had all your reference sets here and your working sets. That would be wonderful if you could do that. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to go back and say, hey, I'm not sure about this. I don't know if that particular piece of evidence was actually examined correctly. It may be that you have a first responder that goes out and collects up all this data for you and they pull no data whatsoever, and when it gets into your lab, you have to open up the evidence bag correctly. You have to make sure that you can pull the evidence off of there. Maybe you videotape yourself doing the imaging and then seal it back up and put it in the evidence locker. Well, that first time that you touch the evidence, you have to record that. That's all a part of your log. There also is evidence that you may acquire that you don't process. And you need to keep track of that. Like a lot of times it's the cabling facilities. You'll wrap up all the cables and you'll keep them, but you'll have cables in your lab so that you don't worry about a frayed cable or a bad Ethernet with lots and lots of kinks in it. Okay. It says closed windows here. I would say no windows. In the forensic labs that I've actually worked in where they actually have had windows that they couldn't do anything about, what they do is they actually put a structure inside of the window and bolt that in place which basically seals up the window at that point. Now, ventilation may be an issue in some labs, so you have to be careful about that. Fire exits may be an issue in the lab, so you have to take that into consideration. You need intrusion alarms throughout the facility. If you have a drop ceiling, what you want to make sure of is that that drop ceiling can't be removed or somebody can't hop over the top of the drop ceiling. You can even put proximity alert alarms inside of the ceiling if you need to. Get closed circuit TV for your cameras and all of the premises going in and out leading from the loading dock all the way to that location. This may even be a separate CCTV process for your organization if you're that big of a lab. Any kind of visitors to the lab obviously have to have visitor passes and they have to be logged into the log books. When we talk about the log, we need at least the name, the date, and the time of the visit, and then the purpose of that visit. You'll see this a lot in large organizations when you check in to go see the marketing department or the accounting department. They'll still capture all of this information because these three key pieces of data that you're actually collecting there may be important to regulations or filings with Securities and Exchange Commission or some other organization that has oversight and regulation on your actual organization. Fire safety's a big deal. Make sure that you protect yourself, especially lots and lots of grounding with this equipment. A lot of the equipment that you're given is not in the best shape. It's been battered, it's been beat up, it's been pushed through some sort of grinder or driven over by a car. And these electrical devices are the source of fires quite often. The best thing that you can do for yourself is make sure that you don't actually have, we like carpet because it quiets things down, but you really ought to consider having a soft padded tiled floor. And I don't mean hard tiles, but I mean actually literally having pads on the floor that protect you and that are also fireproof or fire retardant at that point. I like putting the soft pads in front of the workstations so that they're easy to stand on for long periods of time, but also if you drop something on the floor, you don't want it hitting the tile and busting into a million pieces. You may have to reassemble things and put them back together, and you certainly don't want those pieces being swept away. Fire safety says get rid of anything that can burn if you possibly can, and keep it very clean. Dust in old computers is a really frequent source of fires. If you've got any kind of ribbon cables that you're using, hopefully you'll be using your ribbon cables that have been tested to standard and you're not using the ribbon cables that come with that particular computer because a lot of them get frayed from basically abuse is what it boils down to. Fire suppression. You've got to have sprinklers in all public buildings that I know of at this point. You want fire extinguishers. Dry chemical extinguishers are actually the best when you're dealing with any kind of computer facilities. I would also have in that room a way to kill all of the power to all of the plugs in that room in case you really have a big problem. You can just kill your own breaker and you don't have to worry about running to another piece of the facility. When you're dealing with fire extinguishers, well, here, let me do the training with you. If it's a dry chemical fire extinguisher, pick it up off the wall, hold on to it, pull the pin, grab a hold of the nozzle, point it at the base of the flame, and squeeze. Make sure that you're wheeling it back and forth at the base of the flame, and make sure that if there's any other potential fuel for this fire, that you push it out of the way before you start doing this. Don't get burned. Don't be a hero. If you can't put it out in like 15 seconds, run away. You're not a firefighter. You don't play one on TV. That's somebody else's job. But set up your lab correctly. Electrical. So amps kill. And that's usually what we know about electrical. But listen, volts will hurt a lot and they'll shock you plenty of times. So protect yourself by using static strap, grounding straps. Electrical outlets all need to be sufficient. What I would say is add in extra power for that particular environment to deal with the lab because you're bringing in outside equipment that may be power hungry. Emergency power and emergency lighting are there to protect you. Make sure that you've got that for all of your evidence. Communications. Now, this is kind of a catch-22 situation. You want connectivity to the outside world so that you can research and pull down data, but you want no outside connectivity to your reference systems or to the data that you're actually examining. So you're going to need two different workstations. That may seem, somebody may say, well, why don't you just disconnect it? Well, because we want to make sure that forensically we always have a line between these two. It may be on some computers that you literally solder shut the Ethernet connection so that they don't allow that, and you physically damage the internal Wi-Fi connectors for those devices so that you can say there's no way for this to communicate with any other network, and it's only used for this reference process right here. So make sure you have sufficient bandwidth for that and whatever works for you. Today, we have, in metropolitan areas, we have sufficient bandwidth, whether it's wired or wireless. So I don't think that's much of a problem in communications today.